Hello, and how are you? My name is Winnie Barawa. Welcome to this session on effects and prevention of gender-based violence. If you're new, this channel, what we discuss basically, it's a space where we host lessons, lectures, and interviews pertaining to healthcare. And if this is an area that really got your interest, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, a like, comment, and also subscribe. So in this series, we are doing a series on gender-based violence where we shall explore comprehensively on the concept of GBV, the prevention aspect, and we shall go forward into understanding guidelines that help us in management of gender-based violent cases. So be with us and keep following up on the next videos that will be updating us on this theme. So to begin with, the effects of gender-based violence are widespread, and we shall try to touch on them regarding to physical, emotional, and also any other effects that come around. But to start with, first, we look at the physical health or effects of gender-based violence on the physical aspects. The first thing is with physical violence, we end up with injuries, functional impairment, whereby due to the injuries and trauma, some survivors can end up with functional impairment that are physically manifested. You can also have disabilities, and in cases where the physical violence is engaging in women, you can have cases of induced abortion. You can also have other risks like transmission of HIV and AIDS, transmission of sexual transmitted infections such as gonorrhea and syphilis. In women, we can still have unintended pregnancies, cases of stillbirth, fistulas, and even death. So with physical health effects, it can be widespread, provided there's an engagement on the physical aspect of the survivor, then the effects can be widespread regardless, either could be an injury, it could be fistulas, or it can even be outcomes such as abortions and spread of infections. And the other effects could include emotional and psychological effects. And emotional and psychological effects, you can have effects being displayed in form of depression. So you need to appreciate that psychological violence on clients can really affect their mental status, and they can go or complicate with depression state. They can complicate with low self-esteem. The client can have substance abuse as a way of trying to numb their pain or as a way of to numb their emotional instabilities. And others can have sexual dysfunctions such as erectile dysfunction. And then you can have eating disorders either in the form of anorexia or bulimia cases. And then you can have case of homicide or suicidal thoughts for our clients. And the other bit is PTSD, what we in full we describe as post-trauma disorders, or cases where the person is suffering from post-trauma syndromes or post-trauma symptoms due to the pain or due to the physical violence or sexual abuse that the client has gone through. Then in other cases, we have social effects. Social effects looks at the aspect of relationship-wise or the relation bonds that end up being affected due to this, or the social rights that the survivor can go through due to the aspect of violence. So it can come up through family breakup in form of divorce, separations, or rejections. The client can also suffer from aspects of isolation due to anxiety aspects or lack of interest to interact with other members of the community. Could be loss of wages or source of income. There's victim blaming, which can really also bring out other effects. Maybe the client was bullied, and so on, the patient went through all this violence, and the community may not understand how or the cause of the GBV, and so they can start victim blaming. There's risks for rejection, isolation, and even increased cycle of poverty due to loss of source of income or source of family or financial support. And the other bit is on economic effects, where it can come in form of loss of jobs, loss of income, and expenses that require source of incomes. And at that particular time, it could be that the survivor may not have any interventions to rely on. So the effects can vary from physical, emotional effects, social effects, and even economic. And the other bit is appreciating that gender-based violence not only affects adults, but it can also be heavy on children. And for children, even though they could be the survivors, but in some cases, children more so come on as an extra uh, survivor in the case of, let's say, partner involvement or family involvement. The children suffer more than even the adult because their ability to process information may not be as matured as for how an adult might handle them. And so in this case, the children may portray behaviors that show disturbances. And you could talk about behavioral or emotional disturbances for the children where they can show signs of defiance or signs of stubbornness. And if it's not clearly depicted or picked by the parent or the caregiver at that particular time, the child may go deeper into mental breakdowns or depressive status. And then on the other case is talking about high rate of infants and child mortality, because with physical violence where there's extreme or severe physical beatings on the child, or severe physical trauma on the child, some of them can complicate with disabilities that can actually lead to death. And you can have cases of malnutrition, very common in spaces where we have emotional and economic violence, where children are not provided for their basic rights, and that is in form of housing, nutrition and food and clothing. And so these kids or children can suffer from imbalanced nutrition that can later lead to malnutrition cases. And the other bit is destruction of self-worth due to exposure to anxiety states or due to exposure of emotional violence that destroys the assertiveness, destroys the confidence and the self-belief that the child could have developed, be it if the violence was absent. So when you look at effects on children, it's sometimes it could be a short-term effect, but most also the effects on children come out strongly after a long period of time. So when it comes to looking at children effects, you really need to be open-minded to detect the effects early enough for us to protect the children. But if you're not looking at it clearly, then you can really find children getting these side effects coming out later on after a long period of exposure. And this brings us now into appreciating that you need to take preventive aspects to prevent GBV in our communities. And one of the ways is through partnership and working with community leaders to, to sensitize and create awareness in regards to GBV, be it creating awareness on prevention ways or providing awareness on the different angles that cater for gender-based violence. And the other bit is upholding and implementing the laws in its required status and treating all of humans as equal while upholding human rights. We also need to treat our survivors with more compassion and avoid victim blaming. There's also activating gender and children desks, not only in our judiciary spaces, but also in our law and prevention desks, such that if maybe you're working in a police desk, then you can have a gender and children desk in these spaces where in case of detecting of any gender-based cases, they can be handled differently than just the way people handle criminal cases. Then we need to work around eliminating corruption practices in our different systems so that we can be having equal access to human rights, equal access to social and economic rights for the population. And the other approaches is empowering youth, both men and women, to understand their rights and to understand each and every aspect that occurs in their lives, that they are all equal in the eyes of the law and none is above the other, so that we limit the chances of occurrence of any form of violence among men and women. Then we need to raise awareness not only at the local levels but also globally to empower nations and to empower countries to make declarations to end gender-based violence, be it against men or women, but to promote more gender equality and access to justice or access to human rights. Then the other bit is changing gender norms in our communities and society by educating both boys and girls and also transforming judiciary systems, be it in healthcare and even in our disability networks. So the prevention aspect should be holistic, such that we cater for these changes at all levels, both at the local, that is community level, national level, and even at the global spaces, so that we take care of the needs of each and every gender, that is for both men and women, to prevent any state where there's imbalance of power and control, that any of them might end up as a survivor or a victim of gender-based violence. So basically, community that caters for gender equality and treats men and women as equal beings, catering for their needs without bias and discrimination, then this brings us into a space where we are safe as men and women, and we can all be protected in the eyes of the law. So thank you for staying with us all the way to the end. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and comment, and give this video a like if it has really built up on your knowledge. Thank you, and see you in our next lessons.